So just over the next 10 or 15 minutes, we're just going to give you kind of a brief overview of Terrain AI, which is a project Tim and I have been leading out of Ireland over the past number of years. And in terms of the kind of research infrastructure that we've developed to support research. We take a slightly broader definition of research infrastructure beyond that of kind of the EU definition. And we make the case that research infrastructure should also include the activities in terms of the data collection activities, but also the workflows. And I think Gail and others have previously mentioned this around the Jupyter notebooks. So just by way of introduction to what the project was, it was funded by a national funding agency, National Science Foundation Ireland, and Microsoft. It was a €5 million project led out of Maynooth by Tim and myself and partnered up with a number of research agencies and institutions across Ireland. And ultimately, this the graphic on the right kind of is a simplified kind of representation of what we were doing here. We effectively were trying to build a framework for integrating spatial, temporal, thematic, multimodal, multi-thematic data and measurements across diverse land cover types and uses, ultimately with the aim of improving our understanding of how human activities interact with land management, but specifically around looking at emissions and sequestration potential. We were looking at all terrestrial types in an integrated manner, so looking at urban, grasslands, peatlands, croplands, but also forestry. Sorry. In terms of trying to do that, it's actually quite challenging, much easier to talk about. And the challenge really is actually in how do we bring together the disparate data sets that are required in order to inform how we understand or improve our understanding around these different land cover types. There's various data on the x-axis here varies across spatial scales, but we also have data varying in terms of the temporal scale. So we might have very high resolution 10 hertz flux data measuring CO2 emissions coming off the landscape. We also need to understand the phenology of what's been grown in a particular patch of the landscape, but we also need to understand the management. So ultimately what we're trying to do is move from the left side of this diagram where we have lots of these different data points and start to move towards the right of the diagram where we can start to support regional, national, but also international policies, specifically around carbon reporting. So the nexus point that we were trying to chase ultimately was, could we develop more transparent, robust, scalable data, methods, and models that could ultimately inform improved land use management, but also reporting around emissions and so forth. Tim, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So I guess here, like we're just looking at different kind of data inputs, and we cover the full stack from like satellite through to airborne, drone, and then down on the ground in situ. And then we contextualize that then with different data sets coming in from the geospatial side. A big part of this is the stakeholder engagement piece, and it's something just worth keeping an eye on with any of these projects. You can't do it alone. So it's really good to reach out and have connections to the likes of Copernicus and the European front, different kind of relevant say agencies there, right down into your local kind of member state organizations. And so we worked with quite a few, I guess. Rowan, back to you.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, one of the challenges we encountered here is that actually when you try and collect and collate all this disparate data sources, it's distributed across multiple different agencies, as Tim has just alluded to. So, for example, if you're looking for satellite data, you may have to go to ESA, NASA, or Microsoft Planetary Computer. If you're looking for climate data, you may need to go to Copernicus or ECMWF. If they're national data sets, you need to understand the national data holder, right down to individuals. So what we found actually was that environmental data required to address some of the big 21st century grand challenges around climate change and biodiversity loss are incredibly fragmented. It's also compounded by the fact that there's an absence of a data catalog with appropriate metadata, and also the ability to compute this data. So, for example, us as researchers, do we need to be experts in processing satellite data and complex NetCDF climate information? So the point here is that researchers spend a lot of time actually just chasing data and processing the data before getting on with the actual job of doing research. Tim.
Okay, and I'm just looking at the time here. We got 15 minutes odd left, I think. So, look, folks, what we've done here is we've focused in on the Open Data Cube. We've implemented that on Azure architecture. And you'll see there from left to right the flow of data, which is collected from different Earth observation platforms, both remote sensing and then on the ground in situ. We use the data cube quite a lot here to be able to kind of, work at kind of national, regional scale, but also to go down to that kind of plot level when we're talking about like forestry, fields if it's farms. And you'll see there that we bring in ML here. Again, it's nothing fancy, but just to assist us in both the analysis and also working into those kind of higher level modeling pieces. And well, I'll hand back to you there, Rowan, on that one.
Yeah, so we just take a couple of examples to each of those just to demonstrate what we're talking about. So on the left was the benchmark sites. We're working with various research partners and institutions across Ireland that have deployed flux towers. These are the eddy covariance systems that measure CO2 across the landscape. These dots in a map represent the different locations. The different colors are the different land cover types. And you can see two forestry sites there located in the centre of Ireland. We're now at the point where Ireland has one of the densest flux networks globally, in fact. And as part of Terrain AI, we deployed two forestry sites. You'll see the pictures in the middle here. Colga on the top in January 23, which is a 15-meter tower over mixed species on peatland, and Ballykilcavan at the bottom there was a 45-meter tower over broadleaf forest. And again, this was to augment the existing long-term monitoring site at Dury coniferous forest to try and establish long-term research capacity in forestry across Ireland.
Can I jump in there to Rowan and just say that the importance of benchmark sites, they do two things. They give you like the training data. So remember what we're doing here. See, Ireland is a laggard in terms of forestry. We're about 11% coverage in Europe, and I think about 2% of that native species. We're really, really poor when it comes to like forestry. But these benchmark sites give us that training data and representative, mix of species. The second thing to do is quality control, so that when we take those models and we build and test them, we can come back and actually just prove that we're doing the right thing. So we hold back different test points in there. And just to kind of colorize that a bit, we have both sensors at these sites and we carry out surveys at these sites. So we will do soil sampling in these forest stands. We will do overflights with, say, a LiDAR and look at DBH stuff with GeoSlam and so on. Back to you, Ron.
Thanks, Steve. So this is just an example of one of those forestry sites in Colga, which we deployed almost 2 years ago now. It's a mixed plantation over peatland. And again, on the bottom right here, it's not just a flux tower. As Tim has said, we go out and do very detailed site surveys in terms of the surface, litter fall and so forth, subsurface in terms of soil moisture, but also right up through the full data stack, right up into the atmosphere using drones, aerials and satellite information. Bringing together this network so that it's coherent and integrated, we've spent quite a lot of time in terms of trying to coordinate these different networks. And we've developed a series of protocols. These are similar to the ICOS protocols, but much more detailed in terms of how we develop the footprint analysis, the vegetation monitoring that we undertake, but also the soil surveys here in the bottom right in terms of the soil heterogeneity and how that might partly explain the measurements we're obtaining at these sites.
So and I guess, Rowan, it's important to say that we're not just looking at the kind of static kind of inventory, above ground biomass aspect, but also what's key here is getting a better understanding on the greenhouse gas fluxes. And so there's both static and dynamic things going on, and we're trying to have a go here at building a platform that can come into forestry and just take a look at all of those kind of facets, Rowan. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're ultimately trying to link the measurements from that eddy covariance tower back to the underlying footprint, which has phenology changing, which is management practices changing, but also sitting on more static kind of type data sets in terms of the soil texture and so forth. Yeah.
Okay, so just very quickly, I'm just watching the time here. So we're just looking at satellites. You'll all be aware of those. We are looking forward to like the new satellites coming down the line, like Roselle in 2028, looking at the L-band canopy penetration. We of course will use the classic kind of stack from Sentinel and Landsat here. And of course, keeping an eye on the new kind of X-band stuff that has appeared more recently on Brass, Capella, and of course the older Terasar X. These are all key to kind of give us a hand to collect that information. Go back to what we were saying before. The idea is to get these benchmark sites and then to kind of build these kind of models that can be expanded over other areas. Keeping in mind the soil, building it right up through to the species, the different plots. And one important thing that we didn't mention with the actual sites is the management activity. So we're having information from the forestry companies and organizations on thinning programs and clear cuts and so on. So here, of course, we have our own aircraft with our own sensor pod, and we deploy different LiDAR systems. We've got Regal Vux 1, where we've got a 240 coming online soon. Switching to drone, then, of course, we've got the old Zemus from DJI and the Yellow Scan. And you'll see that we also have the AFX hyper spectral. So these are just all the tools of the trade. We can keep going there. And what's important, and Rowan alluded to this, is building this metadata, data catalog. So we don't really care who owns the data. Don't get proud or don't be, that's not really important. Leave the data sit where it sits. The important thing here is the catalog, the Rolodex card that points to where that data is, how you can access it, and any licensing information. That's what's important. So what we've done here is complete the data catalog on all EO, GIS, management data. That's all Inspire compliant. Next slide. Yeah, and you'll see here how we can kind of switch from static data, if you like LiDAR, to very quickly. I guess Rowan, the more dynamic real-time flux data coming out of Colga and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, this is about the data standards, Tim. In terms of a lot of the flux instrumentation is still relatively new. We don't have similar standards to meteorological stations established like the WMO, and it's really important that we understand the instrumentation type and so forth as part of the processing of this data. So it's again about establishing that integrated but also standardized network of instrumentation suitable for addressing the questions we're asking.
Yeah, and we can keep going there because I'm just watching the time.
Yeah. So again, just working through. It's not just the meter.
So again, like these, as Rowan's flicking through.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and as Rowan was alluding there too, so we have this platform, and the nice bit about it, I guess, is the visualization. So we're able to go and look at a site, and you'd see there the way we kind of approach this from a regional scale, then come down into more, compact AOI to where we're dealing with, say, like a forest stand, and then within the forest stand, then we will be dealing with actual subplots, and we will have all those catalogued, if you like. So it allows both the researchers and indeed some of the stakeholders we're working with to quickly drill down and first of all to discover data. Secondly, look at some of the analysis, and then be able. We don't want to hold this back under our own kind of coat, but leave them work with. This is a very open access platform, I guess, Rowan. And the Jupyter notebooks, this is quite key. So instead of us repeating the same old mistakes, I know a lot of the folk, it will resonate on this workshop call. What we try and do is like standardize those Jupyter notebooks. For us, the catalog is actually a digital catalog. So it's not just data, but it's also those workflows, those processes, those modules, sometimes encapsulated in a Jupyter notebook that can be used and reused, adapted, configured, and brought through. Back to you, Rowan.
Yeah, so as part of that, having brought all the data together in a centralized point of access, as Tim was saying, we can now do interesting stuff and develop those automated workflows in terms of the Jupyter notebooks, but also in terms of data fusion, in this case around Sentinel-2 and drone data. This was a particular workflow that we developed to try and detect the management. Management is fundamental in understanding the emission response at a particular location. So we've been trying to develop these automated or semi-automated tools that we can almost remotely detect the significant management events. This is a grassland in the southeast of Ireland. So we've grazing practices. Can we visually see where, grazing has occurred? And that's important in terms of if you're to run a crop phenology model, a grass growth model, but also to understand what's happening in terms of the dry matter and the response of the landscape to a management change. This is
So
work
like,
that we've been,
yeah.
yeah. Go ahead, Tim.
And I guess inside here you'll see just different aspects. Myself and Rowan will come clean. We're not foresters. We're kind of computational people, Earth observation people, modelers. And in here you'll see the GCBM being used. But the key thing here is us setting the scene, providing the platform, collating the data, making it discoverable, having the basic analysis tools all encapsulated in Jupyter notebooks to us to drill into kind of like forestry. So we're not just looking at what's going on with the soil. Remember, here in Ireland, a lot of the coniferous forestry is associated with kind of organic soils, peaty soils, very poor soils from a farming perspective. So just saying very, very quickly, this platform, I guess, Rowan, just allows us to drill into different aspects.
And ultimately, as we moved across that original state-of-the-art diagram that Tim spoke about, is moving towards that model and scenario piece at the top of all this. So ultimately, it's about the collection, collation, standardization, and ultimately generation of analysis-ready data that we can ultimately inform improved models. And around that, we've developed an integrated modeling framework. So we have our individual domain models in terms of, crop, grass growth, arable, or forestry models. We've also integrated peatland models. We also have specific process-based models around soil carbon and the more dynamical land models. But the ultimate goal here is to integrate all of those, everything that we learn from those detailed forensic level assessments at our benchmark sites, and take that and cascade that up into our coupled or integrated models. So for example, we run the WRF model out of NCAR coupled with a chemistry component, coupled with the vegetation photosynthesis respiration model. Why are we doing this? It's very simple. We can't measure every square inch of the landscape, but if we can develop and improve the models to the point that they are able to reliably estimate what's being measured at our benchmark sites, we can then roll them out across the landscape to estimate values at unmeasured locations. And you can see here in the top right of the graphic where we're using our integrated model to estimate a net ecosystem exchange at one of our benchmark sites. And the model is doing a really good job here. So it gives us confidence that we can take the learnings and transfer them to other locations. And finally, then, I suppose the end point of the discussion, to come back to where we started, it's ultimately about designing this kind of integrated research infrastructure that's more than the equipment, it's more than the compute. It's actually how you conceptualize this from your initial point of departure around these benchmark sites. How you centralize, collate, develop the standards, metadata around that information, the tool sets that you can build, having a centralized point of access to process that data, effectively to do the heavy lifting for researchers, and ultimately how this information can cascade or effectively feed into improved assessment and modeling. And that's ultimately what we're trying to get after here. How can we do this in a more integrated way and ultimately address the types of challenges that are really important in the 21st century? So it's no longer just climate change, it's looking at climate change, biodiversity loss. And within that, forest will play a key role in terms of the sequestration potential. I think I'm just looking at the time, we might leave it at that, T.
Could I just mention just one thing, because we should have mentioned kind of this earlier, just to kind of color this a bit more. So one of the tasks that the forestry guys said to us was like, how could we make their lives easier when they go to carry out on the ground DBH kind of measurements? So we said, look, we can configure the platform. So we look at the stratification initially over the forest stand. We can do it on a landform, the shape of the land, the soil. We can look at the species, look at the age, look at the management type, and have that first initial remote sensing push over those plots to try and figure out what's going on. And then what you do is that in there, you begin to pick out areas within the plots that might be vary slightly. So this is where you target that strategic DBH on the ground sampling. So that's an example of how we were able to use the platform to kind of, and I know this isn't new, you'll all be aware of this kind of work, but it just shows like the power of the platform to be able to kind of reduce, a person days walking around the forest doing your DBH measurements. Rowan.
Yeah, no, back to Gala.
You want to take the first one, Rowan?
No, so focus on Ireland initially was just as a test case. This infrastructure is absolutely scalable across jurisdictions. The plan is that we will scale it. Ireland for us really was just, it was represented a specific domain that we could develop and test many of these ideas. So the intention is to expand, yeah.
And I guess, Rowan, as well, it's important to pinpoint the ethos here. We're not into kind of keeping this behind. We have a very open access kind of push here. So if folk want to get in touch with us, we'll try and accommodate there. So the idea is to have this platform as just a template. If there are useful bits to it, we will open those up to other folk. You can see there the benchmark sites. Well, I guess this is back to you, Rowan.
Yeah. So look, we anonymize the locations, randomize them in terms of to protect the equipment and so forth. But absolutely reach out to us and we can put you in contact with the site owners. And again, the whole focus of the benchmark sites is that they're not just there for collecting flux data. They become a concentrated effort for collecting lots of data, all of which benefits the site and the research activity.
I think the third one there, just from in terms of the recordings and data service and so on. Look, we are researchers here. We do the way we work is that we go out, we try to get funding to do this kind of pretty kind of crucial kind of work. So we will help out as much as we can. The best thing is just get in touch with us and we can see what we can do. Currently, just to explain, TerrainAI has finished its phase 1 of the program. We're in the middle of doing some interim pieces of work with selected crowds. Like, for instance, we're working with agriculture, we're working with kind of urban municipal planners and so on. So the best thing is just to get in touch with us and we can see what we can do.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, I was pushed out of Zoom for a few seconds. So I guess you answered the first 2 questions that you see on the screen, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, thanks a lot. So, and also thanks for your presentation. So as you saw, we have several questions. I know you have to go after because you have a course to give. So maybe, okay, I have one question about really your presentation. So if you could answer this last one. So on community network of network, you use points to represent flux sites. I thought we used polygon for field data.
Yeah, the points are big fuzzy points over our locations. I'm not fully clear what's being asked here, but the flux sites are footprint based, so they're measuring across a polygon, but the site locations are fixed in space. They're a point. But I'm not fully sure I understand
Rowan,
the question.
could I just jump in just from an Earth observation point of view? That perhaps one way to look at this is that there's massive variation across the landscape, and we understand that stuff in Greece is different to stuff in Germany, different to stuff in France, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, and so on. So what we're trying to do here is to use these benchmark sites to see if we can strategically place these benchmark sites to capture that variation, build up the model then so that we can kind of, expand that across, a regional, national, provincial scale, if that makes sense. So, and again, we're working with static and dynamic inputs there. So just saying that, look, this is kind of a multiple kind of puzzle to solve here, but it's those kind of tent poles, if you like, that act as the benchmark sites, and a canopy then is that model that goes right across to tell us what's going on in places that we don't actually go out and measure.